interesting stuff we're going to be reading today on book of Judges, the story of Samson. It always is surprising to read these stories and to realize how how much connection there is to hello, Ellen. How much connection there is to other ancient literatures at certain points of the Bible. So the story of Samson, Samson as a character really seems very much akin to other ancient heroes. Hello, Ellen.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. All right, so I will put up the text up onto the screen, so we all have it in front of us in Hebrew and one version of English, and then we'll go from there. Okay. And Phyllis, do you have a Bible in front of you?
No.
Okay. You know what, Phyllis, I'm gonna try to remember and do my very best. Hello, Thelma.
Hi.
I'm going to do my very best, Phyllis, to remember to swing by at some point and put a Bible into your box so that you can have a text in front of you.
As long as wait a minute. As long as the type is not too small.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's good to know. I will try to figure out. I will take a look, and I will not get you one of those Gideon Bibles. They put in the
Yeah, I know.
hotels.
That's what I have.
Those are no help at all for those of us who.
No.
Yeah, if with those I need to have them right up to my eyes.
You're
all right.
on in 52.
Yeah, well, I've been pretty much not blind, but I've had trouble with my eyesight since I was a tiny little boy. So I'm used to being extremely nearsighted. All right. So this is the story. This is the second story of Samson. In a sense, kind of the first story, because the first chapter in the Samson cycle really is about Samson's mother and father. And what's interesting about the Samson stories, as a general rule, is that they all have prominent roles for women. Not always, shall we say, positive role model type roles. Delilah is, certainly not necessarily a heroine, but it is interesting that unlike the other many of the other judges, where there's women maybe make a token appearance or a cameo or something like this, in the case of Samson, the women all play really, really prominent roles in his life, beginning with his mother, right? And his mother is presented. If you weren't with us last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago, was it last week? I guess last week. I don't even know anymore. I mean, it's so crazy the time we live in. It was last week that Samson's mother is presented as very knowledgeable, very wise, very with it, right? Where his father is presented as kind of a numbskull. So another interesting thing, right, is that the mother there is enjoined that that a razor should not touch Samson's head, right? He will be a nazir, right? This kind of a nazir, a kind of an ascetic kind of a thing. What's interesting is that, of course, in the famous story of Samson and Delilah, right, the hair is very important. But in the two intervening chapters, there's nothing said about the hair and nothing said about him being a Nazir in any kind of a way, and it's just the sort of the spirit of God that comes down onto Samson and gives him his superhuman strength. All right, so let's we will look at this and we'll see. Boop. There we go. Okay. All right, so you only see the Hebrew for a second. We'll fix that right now. Okay, there we go. All right, and Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman. Excuse me a second. Okay. Okay. So Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So it might be worth it just to sort of remind us, right? What is Samson's role, right? He is presented as one of the judges, but unlike the rest of the judges, he is given this very elaborate annunciation scene where an angel appears to his mother and announces his sort of particular role in the world, right? And the role is to sort of begin the destruction of the Philistines, right? And so it would make a certain amount of sense, right, that the Philistines will play a particularly important role in the story of Samson. So he goes down to Timnah and he sees a woman there. Now, like Samson's mother, this woman never gets a name, right? The only woman that ends up getting a name is Delilah. Okay, and he came up and he told his father and his mother and said, "I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me to wife." Very interesting. Then his father and his mother said unto him, "Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines?" And Samson said unto his father, "Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well." And so just stop there for a second, right? So we get the sense, right, that exogamous marriage is not the expected thing, right? One is not expected to go and marry a woman from among, if not the enemy, at least the people who are ruling over, right? We'll see this again and again, right? That the Philistines are in charge right now, right? And so this is the question I would want to pose, right? Which is the meaning of verse 4 here. Verse 4 is, "But his father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord, for he sought an occasion against the Philistines." Now, at that time, the Philistines had rule over Israel. So, what do you make of this, the way that God is behaving here? Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? This is,
Right.
it's very odd, right? When, we think of, if you think of Moses, right, or you think of Abraham, right, and the way, or even, Jeremiah, right, or Isaiah, think of the later prophet Jonah, right? God is very straightforward in a certain way. Right, God comes and says, this is what I'm going to do. It may not make a lot of sense, right? But God is very clear, right? It's not clear to me here at all, right, that Samson has any direct interaction with God, right? Despite the fact that an angel came down and announced to his mother, right? It's not, I don't see here God saying to Samson, go and marry this woman, this Philistine woman. All right. But this is presented as being the Lord's idea, right? God's idea. Ellen, you want to say something?
Yeah. Doesn't he say that she pleased me well?
Yeah.
And this seems to be a very superficial judgment.
Yeah.
But maybe that is the voice of God speaking inside him.
It could be, right? It could be, right? That and as the story goes, right, it turns out that the whole relationship seems very, very superficial, as we will see, right? And really does seem, in a sense, to be kind of a pretext for Samson to do violent acts. So let's continue, right? And so then Samson went down, and his mother and his father, to Timnah, and came to this vineyard of Timnah, and behold, a young lion roared against him. So this is a little mysterious, right? Because it appears that Samson is with his parents, right? And then the lion comes. But later it appears that the parents know nothing about the lion. So somehow this must have been some sort of a solo excursion that Samson took. So what happens with the lion? Right? And a lion, is that you, Ellen? You got to go? Okay. I'll just mute Ellen so she can talk if she wants. She said she would need to go. We'll see if she does go. Oh, there she goes. Okay. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. Right? Go ahead, Phyllis.
No.
Okay. So Vayered, no, I'm sorry, the next one. Vatitzlach alav ruach Adonai. Right? Yeah. So very interesting, right? It flung itself, right, upon him, right? And he rent the lion, right, as one would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand.
Get on the bed.
But he told not his father or his mother what he had done. Right? So there is this kind of almost sort of mythological sort of fight with a lion, right? Recalls Hercules or Gilgamesh
Right.
doing these sorts of things.
Right.
Right. And then so he went down and talked with a woman, and she pleased Samson well. He liked her. Still likes her. Right? And after a while, he returned to take her. Vayashov miyamim, right? Lachakta. Right? So this idea is that this is the old version of marriage, right? Where you're betrothed, right? So she pleased him well, so they were betrothed. And then in a certain period of time, later commentators will say it's a year, but obviously here it's not clear that it's a year. It's just later, right? He returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. Right? So he's like, hey, let me go see if this lion is still lying around. And there it was, right? And there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. Hello, Suzanne.
Hi. Sorry I'm late. I was in Raquel's class.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Always happy for people to get some exercise. It's good. So we're just talking about Samson. He's fallen in love with a Philistine woman down in Timnah, and as Ellen pointed out, right, the relationship seems to be very, very superficial. The only thing that it says, right, is that the woman pleased him. Right, there's nothing else about it, but it does give Samson a chance to go down to Timnah and kill a lion. Right, to demonstrate his. This is the first sort of display of superhuman strength that we see from him. And then he comes back, and a year later, right, there is this sort of the carcass of the lion has been turned into a beehive, and there's honey there, right? And he scraped it out into his hands and went on eating as he went. And he came to his father and his mother. So again, it seems like he must have taken a kind of detour and gave it to them. And they did eat. But he told them not that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Right, very interesting.
Is that taboo?
I don't know. I'm torn here between the notion that there's some sort of great mystery and symbolism to the lion and the honey in the lion versus that it's just a very bald plot device, as we will see later.
It's not unclean?
I'm sorry?
It's not unclean? Is it unclean or unclean?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think if he were to eat the lion, it would be unclean. But I think this is honey out of a lion. Would be like honey out of any other. I mean, I don't know to what degree. From a zoological perspective, this is a thing.
Well, if you take it,
Say it again, Phyllis?
if you take it kind of as a symbolite thing, then the lion is very powerful as an animal, which could be analogous to Samson's power, and
Yep.
the honey could be the sweetness of his betrothed.
Right. It could be right. It could also be right that this might be a little bit far fetched, right? But that Samson has this on one hand, right, this remarkable superhuman strength, but he also has very little self-discipline. And that
Right, yeah.
sweetness will lead to various forms of downfall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but there's also the possibility that it's just purely a plot device, because as you will see, there's a riddle that comes later, and Samson needs something to make the riddle out of. All right, so. And his father went down unto the woman. Sorry, there we go. And his father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. All right. So, very interesting. The question that I would have is like, what happened to his mom?
Right.
all of a sudden, his mom is gone. Which is an interesting shift. It is interesting how is it just understood, right, that his father here stands for both parents. I don't pretend to know.
What does it mean when he says, and thus do the young men do? Is that Philistines, young men, or is this Israelites?
That's another great question, right? That's another great question, and it isn't, and it is sort of a question also of were besides the God that they worshipped, were cultural practices so very different, right? It could be that Philistines and Israelites intermarried all the time, and this is just what they did, right? I don't know. It's a good question. An Orthodox, of course, an Orthodox person. An Orthodox reader of the Bible, I don't mean like from a denominational perspective. I just mean from a traditional Jewish perspective, right? Would want to point out, right, that there's, that Samson here is doing something that is going to lead to trouble, right? That if you marry a Philistine, right, it's only gonna lead to tsuris for everybody involved, right?
What we read in the past was about mixing of Israelites or Jews and the local people.
Right.
And that earlier in our readings, this was just the worst thing that you could find.
Exactly. Right. And I think that, the Bible by and large doesn't like it, right? Because it invites a religious syncretism, right? As we all know, right? If you marry, whoever you marry, right? Generally, unless you are very strictly limited to people who are of the same, not only the same religion, but the same set of sort of practices in the two families, right? There's going to be some mixing, right? and that's going to lead to. So here, right, you've got a situation where you're going to marry someone who is an idol worshiper, right? That is seen as a very, very bad thing. On the other hand, the text doesn't spend a lot of time here, at least, complaining about it, right? So again, you get the sense, as we do very often, of the various voices that we hear in the Bible, right? The Bible is not a univocal document. So you'll get various attitudes at various times. All right, and so I think that's a great question, David. Which kind of young men, right? And very interesting also that it's put in this sort of anthropological past kind of thing. Like we don't do this anymore, but this is what they used to do, right? And it came to pass when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. Very interesting.
Who's they?
Yeah, right. Who's they? So what do you think?
I don't know who they is.
Yeah. I'm going to assume, like, based on the commentaries that I've looked at, it is right that usually, right, the groom would have some sort of posse, right, some sort of retinue, what we would call groomsmen today, right, and Samson is coming from another country, and so he only has his dad and presumably his mom along for the ride, so he needs groomsmen, so they provide him with that. But again, I don't know. It's an interesting question. And Samson said unto them, let me now put forth a riddle unto you. If ye can declare it me within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of raiment. But if ye can, go ahead.
I know numbers in the Torah are symbols, but what's with all these 30s?
Yeah.
30 companions, 30 this, then it will be 30 something else.
Right. And then the 7 days, right? And then the 7 days, yeah. So yeah, I don't pretend to know, but I'm sure there's gematrists, the people who work with numbers that would come up with something about this. I mean, 30 is one of those, it's a round number equivalent to a month. Maybe it has to do with a month of, he wants to have he thinks that this riddle is unsolvable, right? So maybe he wants to have a month's worth of clothing given to him. And the 7 day, wedding feast, right, becomes something that is sort of standard in traditional Jewish traditional Jewish life. You have a 7 day wedding feast. It doesn't seem necessarily that was the usual thing, right? Here, but again, who knows? But yes, I think that's it. I think good questions, right? If you cannot declare it, right? If you can't answer my riddle, right, then you're going to give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. And they said unto him, put forth thy riddle that we may hear it. And he said unto them, out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days declare the riddle. Right. And of course, it's not really a riddle, right? This was something that, this is sort of a miraculous happening that had never happened before, and the only person ever to have seen it was Samson. So, it doesn't really count as a riddle. But so I don't know if and again, is this supposed to show something about Samson's psychology? That he's a little bit of a cheater. I really don't know, right? And it came to
second part?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Is the second part out of the strong came forth sweetness?
Yeah.
Is the strong the lion and the sweetness the honey?
Yes, exactly. So out of the eater, right? Out of the eater, that's the lion, right? Came forth food, right? Samson is not necessarily presented as a yeshiva bucher here, right? But it is interesting, right, that that in the rules of kashrut, right, we do not eat animals that eat other animals, right? We don't eat predatory animals, at least land animals, right? Fish, I don't want to say anything about, but you're not. We don't eat lions, right? We don't eat. We don't eat. And we don't eat raptors. Of among the birds we eat, right? We only eat ones that can be domesticated and don't hunt, right? So I don't know if that's what he's getting at here, right? But out of an eater, right, came forth food. And they could not in 3 days declare it. And it came to pass on the seventh day that they said unto Samson's wife, entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have ye called us hither to impoverish us? So I think this is the problem with rented groomsmen, right? Is they're not really your friends.
Oh dear.
All right. And so what's Samson's wife going to do, right? She's sort of stuck between Samson and these people, right? And Samson's wife wept before him and said, thou dost but hate me and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and wilt thou not tell it me? And he said unto her, behold, I have not told it my father nor my mother, and shall I tell thee? And she wept before him the 7 days. The chronology doesn't quite work here, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the seventh day that he told her, because she pressed him sore. And she told the riddle to the children of her people. Right? Very interesting, right? That livnei amah, right? So there's this sort of notion that even though she's married to Samson, right, she retains this loyalty to her people, because that's what this is how she talks about them, right? Bnei amah, to the children of her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the seventh day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. All right, so he responds to their response with another riddle. So what does he mean?
This is all three of these last verses are kind of convoluted because, first of all, he didn't tell the riddle to his father or his mother.
Right.
But so why should he tell his wife? But people tell their spouses lots of things that they don't tell their parents.
Right.
So
yes.
That part didn't make sense.
Well, it might not make sense
here
from our perspective, right? But it
right.
might be telling us something about the way Samson is, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would take.
Phyllis, wait 1 second. Suzanne still is going to something to say, I think. And then we'll come to Phyllis.
Okay. So in the next verse, she pushed him to tell her, and then she didn't keep it a secret. Like you would think the wife, her husband told her something that was obviously a secret because he didn't tell anybody else.
Right.
And then she spreads it around.
Right.
So you're right. So what you said was true. The loyalty was not to him at all. It was to her people.
Exactly. Yeah. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Well, I would take what Samson said as meaning if they had not slept with his wife.
Yeah, that's what's so right. So that is, it does seem that way, right? And although, I mean, I guess you could sort of say, you don't sleep, plowing with a heifer is not the same as plowing my fields, right? So if the heifer is her, right, that
Yeah.
means that they used his wife to plow up the ground, right, and to discover what. So it is, but it definitely has that sort of sexual
Yeah.
connotation.
It does.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ellen.
Um, they had threatened to burn her father's house down.
Yeah.
And so presumably they were living, or during this feast, they were staying in her family's home,
Right.
rather than him sort of escorting her back to his family.
Exactly. Right.
One
I mean,
can
I think I do think that was the way it was done. It was sort of like, the sort of the wedding feast was at the, in the house of the daughter, and then, of the woman, and then that transition would happen back after the wedding feast.
Given the
but-
threats against being burned down, I mean,
Yeah.
being killed too, presumably. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, it does sort of, and you begin to sort of see here a little bit of the again, remember that this is all happening under the sort of rubric of God having a plan for Samson to do violence against the Philistines, right? So if the Philistines do violence against themselves, right, on account of Samson, that may still fit into that general category, as disturbing as it is. All right, so very interesting. Just note, right, that Samson has a hard time withholding information from his wives, right? And we'll see this again in chapter 16. And then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, right? The same word, vatitzlach, right? Came mightily upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon. So this is very interesting, right? He doesn't actually take revenge on the men who used his wife to get the information, right? He instead takes revenge on other Philistines. So he went down to Ashkelon and smote 30 men of them, right? And took their spoil and gave the changes of clothing unto them that declared the riddle. And his anger was kindled, right? So instead of this vengeance calming him down, right, and letting him sort of move on, he is anger. He's angry, right? And he went up to his father's house. So he leaves the Philistines, right? But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had for his friend. Right? Very interesting. A different translation has it slightly different. It says, it says, and Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who had been in his company, right? And so basically the idea is that one of those 30 guys that discovered the riddle through the wife was, took this woman as a wife. So I think that, I think it was you, Phyllis, right, who suggested the sexual connotation of this.
Right. Yeah.
So this does seem to give credence to it, right? That Samson goes away and one of his rented groomsmen ends up with his bride, right? Which will turn into not very good situation in the next chapter. So we'll just stop for a second for impressions and any questions, and then we'll press on to chapter 15, which is sort of a unit with chapter 14. Okay, so let's continue. But it came to pass after a while in the time of the wheat harvest, sorry about this shifting, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. So I guess he got over his anger and he's going to go down to Timnah and visit his wife and try to make it up to her by bringing a lamb, right? And they'll have a feast. And he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber, but her father would not suffer him to go in. Right? You can't go in, right? And her father said, I verily thought that thou hadst utterly hated her. Not an unreasonable assumption, right? Given that he had decamped from Timnah first to murder 30 men in Ashkelon and then back up to his father's house with nary a glance backwards, right? So essentially, right, he thought that the father thought that Samson had divorced her, basically, right? Therefore, I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. Right? So, and Samson said unto them, this time I shall be quits with the Philistines, right? If only, right? When I do them a mischief. Right? So he again has this sort of notion that he will quench his anger through violence against them. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches and turned tail to tail and put a torch in the midst between every two tails. And when he had set the torches on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burnt up both the shocks and the standing corn and also the olive yards. Right. So this unfortunately has, resonance with, even today, right, of destroying agricultural land. This is a long-standing way of attacking your enemies. When then the Philistines said, who hath done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he hath taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father in fire.
Wow.
Right. So, the woman, had tried to avoid having her father's house be burned, right? And eventually it comes back, right? So this violence. So again, we see this violence, and this seems to be, Samson seems to be the unwitting hand of God here in this violence, but it's not any sort of decisive battles, right? It doesn't remove the Philistine rule from the Israelites, right? It just seems to be somewhat random chaos. Right? And Samson said unto them, if ye do after this manner, surely I will be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. So I'm not really sure what that means. I think what it means, right, is that was not that Samson does not have enough vengeance, right? He wants to wreak even more havoc now, right? He seems to have this sort of this unquenchable reservoir of anger and violence, right? And so he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Right? It's not really clear, of course, as it often is not entirely clear, what exactly it was that Samson did or whom he did it against, right? But it just the sort of the general indications of violence. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves against Lehi. Okay, so this where he's living, right, is in the area of Judah, and the Philistines follow him, and we'll see again. We see this with several of the judges, right, and in a sense, we this is something that's familiar to us. Even in a different form, right, with the story of Moses, right, where someone who's a leader, right, of the Israelites puts them into danger by the confrontation with the enemy of the Israelites. So the men of Judah said to the Philistines, why are ye come up against us? And they said, to bind Samson are we come up, to do to him as he hath done to us. Right? Very eye for an eye kind of behavior here, right? Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam. 3,000 men.
3,000.
I mean,
Big cleft, very big cleft.
say it again, David.
There's a 3. It's 3,000 men.
Yeah.
It's 3. It keeps, the 3 keeps repeating itself.
Yeah. Yeah. You see lots of 3s, 7s, 30s, right? And then we'll have in chapter 16, which we'll do next week, right? Not next week, but the week after, will be 3. It's 3 and 4, right? So there's, these are common tropes in the Bible, right? There's certain parts of biblical narrative and biblical poetry, right? Will repeat these numerological tropes. All right. So so they need 3,000 men to deal with Samson, right? They, because they seem to know who Samson is, right? And they said to Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? Don't you know who they are? Don't you know your place? Right? What then is this that thou hast done unto us? Right? It's not so much what did you do to the Philistines, right? But by doing whatever you did to the Philistines, right, you're doing this unto us, right? You're making our lives harder by being an annoyance to the Philistines, right? And he said unto them, as they did unto me, so have I done unto them, right? They plowed my field, they yoked my heifer, right? And so I have burned their fields, right? And smote them, right? And so and they said unto him, the Judahites, right, say to Samson, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. Why do you think he says that? I'm kind of interested in that line. Well, actually, let me read the next verse and then we can ask. And they spoke unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand. But surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. All right. So why is it so important to him that they do not attack him? Go ahead, Ellen.
He doesn't want to hurt his own kinsman.
Yeah, right.
He wants revenge against the Philistines, so that's
Right.
where he wants to go.
Exactly. He doesn't want to have to, he doesn't want, he's so, I agree. Any other thoughts? I mean, are people who, have a different view of this? I mean, because it doesn't seem to me that he's afraid, right, that the Judahites will actually be able to kill him, right? He's more afraid that, they will kindle his anger. He's like the Incredible Hulk, right? he gets angry and then he just kills everything around him. He doesn't even think, about what's going on. Go ahead, David.
It's almost as if he can't control himself.
Right. And it's fascinating, right, that he has this sort of, and here again, right, there's no talk here of his hair. Delilah hasn't entered the picture. He's just a complete wild man, right? Go ahead, Ellen. Yeah.
I mean, he's been raised as a Nazarite, so one who's been sort of cut off from certain aspects. But the one thing he seems to lack is self-control.
He has none, right? He has no self-control. It's really interesting, right? And he seems to, at least in this scene, he seems to have some sort of almost inkling of it, right? Like, don't you attack me, because if you do, right, then I'm going to have blood guilt, from the 3,000 Judahites that I kill, right? All right. So when let's see, and they brought him up from the rock. When he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. Right? And again, the same phrase. Right? Vatitzlach alav ruach Adonai. Right? So it's very clear, right, that the narrator associates Samson's power with God. Right? And so that complicates, what we've been saying about Samson, right? That he has no self-control, because there are times where that the spirit of God doesn't seem to be upon him, and he's still violent and crazy, right? But his most violent and most crazy is when this Spirit of God comes upon him. And the ropes that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands dropped from off his hands. Right, I can sort of see like an old-fashioned special effects in the movie. Like he, or I mean, again, to sort of torture the metaphor. The Incredible Hulk. Where somehow his clothes always manage to expand just enough, right, so that he's still decent, right, but the rest of it, it kind of pops off of his body, right? And he found a new jawbone of an ass, right? He seems to really like finding skeletons, and put forth his hand and took it and smote 1,000 men therewith, right? So he doesn't even have a proper weapon, right? All he has is the jawbone of an ass, right? And that is enough of a weapon for him to kill 1,000 men.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So the Lehi of the jawbone is the same Lehi as the name of the place?
Place, exactly. Yeah, Lehi is called jawbone. I don't know. There is a little bit later we'll see that the narrator explains the name of the place based on this jawbone. So, and Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of an ass, I have smitten 1,000 men. Right. So Samson likes to talk in poetry, okay. Yeah, and you can see in the Hebrew, right? Bilchi hachamor, chamor, chamoratayim, right? Lots and lots of asses, right? In a sense, it says heaps upon heaps here, but it's like asses plus two asses, right? Bilchi hachamor, right? Hikiti elef ish. So it's proper biblical poetry, right? And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place was called Ramat Lehi, right? So here we get this is why it's called Lehi, right? It probably wasn't Lehi before he killed his 1,000 men there, but now it's called that. And he was sore athirst and called upon God. Right, the first time we ever see him doing this, right, we see God visiting him all the time, right, with this crazy ruach, right, this crazy spirit. But this is the first time that Samson calls to God, right, and said, "Thou hast given this great deliverance by the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised?" Right, he's a little kvetchy, It's like, I've done this, but he does give credit for his deed to God here, right? When his first little poem, it's just about him, right? Him and his jawbone. But this time he says, "Okay, you're right, God. It's because of you that I was able to do this, right? But now you're going to let me die of thirst, right? But God, and this, I think this is just fascinating. Verse 19, right? But God cleaved the hollow place that is in Lehi, right? And there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came back, and he revived. Wherefore the name thereof was called Ein Hakoreh. which is in Lehi unto this day. Right. So the ideology. So Robert Alter reads says, "Ein hakore." In this ideology of the name, it is understood to mean the spring of one who calls out. Right. But the Hebrew kore, one who calls out, has a homonym that means partridge, and it is likely that a place originally called Partridge Spring, because partridges frequent the area, was given this new narrative explanation for its name. All right, so and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Okay, so this is Samson, right? This is the Samson, the second unit of Samson's stories, right? The ones that are his first series of adventures with the Philistines, punctuated, by these bursts of horrific violence. So I open the floor to reactions, to questions, and again, sort of what I'm still I have to say, I'm very puzzled by what God is doing here, right? Well, I'm not sure I entirely understand, and sort of at a larger level, right? I'm not sure what the text is trying to say about God's intentions or methods, and I'm also not sure what, by and large, the sort of function of this narrative is, especially in the context of Judges, right? Because Samson behaves so unlike all the other judges.
I can't understand why they would have made him a judge.
Yeah, right.
But isn't it possible that this story was around for a long time?
Yeah.
And that he was simply kind of almost plugged in to the judges' slot.
Yeah.
And that it took off from there.
I think David, that that's I think a very worthy kind of a suggestion. I'm not enough of a critical source scholar to be able to tell you yes or no, but it does appear, just from the evidence of the 4 chapters regarding Samson, right, that there's the first story where it's really about his mother, right, and then there's the final story, chapter 16, the third one, right, which is about Samson, but it does reference the business of the hair, right? Whereas in these 2 chapters, right, there's nothing about the hair. There's nothing about his status as a Nazirite. And so it is quite possible, right, that these were 2 separate traditions about the same legendary figure, to be sure. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
Well, I have a question and a comment. So my question is, what they don't give an etymology for the name Shimshon. So what does that mean?
Ah, right. So that was actually at the that's in chapter 13.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you are right that they just say, right, Vatikra et Shemo Shimshon. This is in verse 24. But unlike in a lot of cases where the mother will explain, right, why she called the kid that, right, there's no explicit meaning. There's no explicit explanation in the text of the Tanakh itself. So this is what Alter says about it. Although the own suffix of the Hebrew Shimshon is used for quite a few biblical names, it could also be related to own potency, making the name suggest son of potency, right? Shimshon. That's what this is what Alter says. Some scholars have conjectured that behind this figure there might be traditions about a solar deity. In any case, the link with the sun is another warrant for the fire motif, right? There's fire in the first chapter, right, in chapter 13, the fire that we see when the angel departs and goes back to heaven, right? And then there's the fire in chapter 15 rather, right, with the foxes. I'm sorry?
So,
We lost Thelma. And then he says, in terms of mythological patterns, this figure also bears some resemblance to Hercules, which I had said before, right? That Hercules has a lot of there's a lot of similarities between Hercules and right. It's quite possible that another commentary suggested, and I'm citing this from memory, so excuse me if it's not quite coherent, but that Samson actually ends up being the last of the judges, right? And that that in a sense, if there is a sort of an ideological direction of the book, right, it's that this model of judgeship is not a sustainable model, right? That you can't have 40 years of peace and quiet and then all hell breaks loose again, and everyone does what they want to do, and so on and so forth. So it does seem to be perhaps pointing towards the next book, right, the Book of Samuel, that where the monarchy becomes the model of governance. Obviously with some resistance from Samuel, but ultimately that's the way that it goes. Phyllis, did you want to say something?
I really like the fire analogy.
Yeah.
That fits it very well.
Yeah. No, he's right. I mean, because again, it's that sort of, as we know from our own day, right? That fire is barely controllable, right? Right. And humans start fires, and then we struggle to contain them.
Right.
So it's so yeah, I really do think that there's really something very powerful about this, and the idea, right, that this is essentially a secularization of a solar deity, right, is a very interesting idea, right? That Samson's actually some sort of a deity from the Israelite past, right, and now we're trying to turn him into a human figure. And that's why there's this constant refrain of God putting God's spirit on him, right? To make it clear that is not from Samson himself, right? It comes from God, right? Yeah, go ahead, David.
So you're quoting Alter here, but I don't have this in my edition of Alter. I've got a Kindle version, and I get the footnotes at the end. But is this something that comes earlier before?
This is no. This is just I have a print version of Alter. I almost never buy myself books, but I decided I would make an exception. It's not out of any kind of asceticism. It's just because I have too many books already. But yeah. So this is just in the footnotes. So my guess is on the Kindle edition, if you go to the footnotes of chapter 13, verse 24, that you'll find what I read.
13? I was just finishing 14.
Yeah, no, chapter 13, verse 24 is where Alter discusses Samson's name.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead, Ellen.
Just a comment that in what we've been reading, it's more like he's judging the Philistines.
Yeah. Right.
They're deceitful and cruel,
Right.
and they overdo it. I mean, when they want to say, well, he burns their crops, so he's going to burn people. And
Right. Right. No, I love that comment. I think that's really, 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 really perceptive, right? Because the only interaction that he has with Israelites is with the 3,000 Judites that he's worried about killing, right? And even they become sort of it's almost like, again, a plot device, right? That they need to tie him up, right? So that he can show off how he bursts out of his bonds. Right. And so it is kind of ironic that it says, oh, he judged the Israelites, right, for 20 years when we don't see him doing anything like that. Right. All of his time is spent in Philistine and killing them. That's all he ever does. or having sex with them. Yeah. Go ahead, Suzanne.
I'm kind of puzzled. So God must have known that Samson was his volatile personality. So did he decide to use Samson's personality to do all this stuff with the Philistines? Because the other take would be God picked Samson, and then it happened that Samson was volatile, but that doesn't fit with my usual take on.
Yeah, I think this is. I think that we might struggle. I think to make theological sense out of this story, and what I'm sort of more in. I myself am inclined to understand it as what the sort of the way David was suggesting, right? That we have this existing set of legends, right, which was too prominent in the cultural memory of the people to be ignored. We couldn't just sort of like write Samson out of the story, right? So that the redactor is using this story, right, to with a variety of ends, right, to make Samson into a human figure, right, rather than to keep him as a kind of a demigod or as a right with this, because the this annunciation scene, right, this also seems very mythological, right? It's like Zeus and Leda, right? And this idea that, oh, God is going to descend, like they, like the B'nai Elohim in chapter 9 of Genesis, right, when they come down and begin to have children with human women, right? This sort of mythological thing, right? You can sort of see, oh no, we're going to make it very clear, right, that Samson has a mother, but Samson also has a father, right? And that's his father, right? And it's, God is not Samson's father, right? Samson's father is Samson's father, and Samson himself is not a god, right? Samson is inspired by God, and he's also, let's make Samson a judge, and we'll show how bad judges are. So I'm not, I wouldn't want to, I wouldn't want to stand on that too firmly, right? But I think I don't know where I go, right, with starting from the perspective that there's a God who decides, oh, I need someone like Samson in my world, right? That sort of deceitful, forthcoming God, right, is not the God that we see in other places in the Bible. So I'm not sure what to do to harmonize it, but I'm not much of a harmonizer. So you need Rashi for that.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, Ellen, you get the last word.
Well, I'm sorry. No, I was just thinking, compared to what you were saying, that Abram is told to sacrifice his son, and it's like, no. So sometimes this is like a way of saying this is a really bad idea.
Right. Oh, that's an interesting thing, right? That's an interesting point. Like, to what degree is God fooling Abraham in that regard, right? And seeing what Abraham will do. It is an interesting question, right? But the point is here, right, is that God doesn't say anything to anybody here. It's only the narrator, right, who says this was God's plan, right? Which is also, sometimes Joseph says, don't worry about selling me into slavery, right? And telling my father that I'm dead. It's no big deal. This was God's plan, right? That's a character doing it, right? But that's very different than the narrator doing it. So interesting questions. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi Jim.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. I'll see. Next week is our Tu B'Shvat Seder. So.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.